First talk to our times, fracturing the prison. It goes without saying, Marx is right. In many ways, capitalism prefigures those communities, that way of having a community that could survive it. It kind of pre-invokes it. Yesterday, I left with a problem. That was that problem about how on earth, what on earth does it mean to live in communities? And in a sense, capitalism provides part of the answer, but distorted. And the answer, I think, best seen in money. First of all, I'm going to jump philosopher now. After a minute, that's a bit cruel, but there we go. For me, money exists, as Spinoza would have it, as the idea of mechanization. So that it doesn't allow you to understand the system at all, but it allows you to have an idea of what the system is doing. It allows you to understand what it means to be in a system that is perpetually wanting to grow, that is turning human production into a force of nature, that is transfiguring desire, so that it becomes like a Greek god. All of that we can express through money. We understand it then in terms of money that flows through the economic system, that augments itself, that changes where it is invested, that shifts what it's doing. It gives us then a way to follow what industrialization means, from the desire through the powers of nature that manifest that desire, and back to the machines and to the capitalists who make the machines, and then round again in further investment and the further creation of desire. Now here you have to be quick and point out that for Marx, and also for Spinoza for that matter, money was a very different affair from what it is today, because it was actually embodied in gold. And so the amount of gold in the system was limited, which of course changed what money was for Marx. But for us, with our open-ended money, based on sovereign debt, and the amount governments borrow in order to create money, in order to finance the entire system, money that is born then in debt and dies in taxes, but has a life, sculpts a distorted model of society. But Spinoza, of course, warns against consciousness in exactly the same way that Marx will warn against just valuing money. Consciousness, Spinoza would say, perceives good and evil too quickly. It's a shortcut. As I am always conscious, not just of my good ideas, but my bad, I can always claim them somehow to my own. I can own that which can never be owned. My own hatreds. I can fold them into what I am through my conscious mind. That doesn't give a fart whether they actually are mine. It merely knows that it has the idea of them and pursues them regardless. Consciousness, for Spinoza, is as dangerous a guide as money is. Because of course, once money becomes the value in the system, then the entire thing shifts. It no longer becomes just about following industrialization, understanding what it is, tracing it, looking at how it creates value. It becomes the value, and the rest follows. I don't need to endlessly berate capitalism. You can do it for me. But it creates a system that is based on the idea of what creates value, and not on the value itself. And so one that is very likely then to undermine or corporatize anything of actual value in the system, render it thoroughly visible to capital, but actually invisible to the way that humans do their humanity. And so products get stripped out, become just commodities to be sold on markets, and the farmers that produce them are lost or forced to industrialize and mechanize and poison their communities in order so that you can drink false champagne or drink whatever coloured drink you want to pour into your latte. All that jazz. But the point about all of this, as Marx, but also Spinoza would say, is that consciousness is never totally wrong. It's not that you have to expand your mind to move to an ability to live in communities, ability to be a man of reason for Spinoza, a person of reason, absolutely, or a citizen in a potential communist state. It's rather you have to fully understand that which capitalism, that which consciousness can never understand, that it itself is not sovereign, that it is merely the idea of the idea, that in order to move to any other sort of state, you have to understand that idea in its pure form, that pure ability to follow what is happening, to follow the money wherever it goes. And one of the problems I raised yesterday, at least in my own mind, was I thought, it's endless poppycock, just berating people and saying, well, look, just saying we're going to all live in community, or saying that we're all going to live in communities is simply the problem, not the answer. If I didn't provide at least ways to problematize, ways to think about what the problem is. And that is, of course, what I'm trying to do today. This idea, then, of following things, of working out how things flow, where they are creating use for humans and where they are creating harm for humans. That idea that money by itself does, the idea of value, but value defined in a fairly abstract way for money, is surely the way we need to understand who and what we have become. Now, what do I mean by that? What I hope I mean is relatively straightforward. One needs to understand commodities no longer as something that is therefore just used by me here and now. We all know that. Plastic lives long after we've finished using it. And once you start to concentrate upon that, then you start to concentrate upon the lifespan of plastic, which isn't eternal. It certainly breaks down, but it breaks down at a certain time, at a certain cost. And to understand a world ecologically, therefore, is to follow the common notion, is to follow the commonality of plastic before it was used and after it was used. It is to follow how the money works, where the product came from, and where it goes. Likewise, if you're thinking, how do I actually form a community? One of the things, many things you have to concentrate on is things like water. You see it here in France. One of the things I like about living in rural France is you actually have to think of things like water, because it becomes a resource. As a rule, we'd like to use water twice, if you can. Yes, you need to drink with it, but once you've drunk with it, it goes into a system that eventually creates water that can be used to water the garden, because we're part of the system. And you have to understand what it is to live in a body that is actually part of an environmental world. And the products that you think of as just waste are merely the next stage in the process. And to start to think about what it means then to have a humanity that understands its own individuality as merely a cog within a natural world. Again, to quote Spinoza, to be part of nature and not a kingdom separate from it. To understand then what money does, not as for money alone, as something separate from the natural world, but as a way of thinking about value in the money world, a way of following what happens next. Because it is in following what happens next you start to form those common notions. You start to form those ideas of where you fit in and why it matters, and therefore what you can do, how you can reuse those resources you thought you had lost. In times of drought, it's going to be what you're going to have to do. In times of famine, you've got no other choice. So if you're thinking, how do I take my apocalypse lessons now? Those apocalypse lessons, yes, you can dress it up in vulgar do-gooding if you want. I'm afraid I do find it vulgar, but I actually think Or you can dress it up in scientific inquiry, which I'm afraid is what I do. You'll see my intellectual prejudices breaking out there. Which is, what can I do with this thing? How can I use it? How can I reuse it? Why do I only need to buy it once? Here, again in France, but this is true in Devon as well, you get the movement to demand that the food that we eat ought to have seeds that we can sow in it. It ought to, if you think about it. It is one of the triumphs of capitalism that we assume that it doesn't. It is one of the triumphs of seed manufacture that it doesn't. That you can't simply sow the seeds of a pumpkin and grow a pumpkin, it won't work. Or if it does, it will become something so vile you won't want to eat it. The point is, our own food ought to have the resource to growing the next lot of food. And our own manure, our waste, ought to be reusable. It can be. Actually, that bit's easy. That's just a dry loo, well managed. You just have to separate the pee from everything else. And it's then very, very straightforward to manage in quite small environments. All that stuff. So turning yourself into a resource. And turning any community you live into, therefore, a way of manufacturing resources, of reusing what you thought was once waste. That is the first step on the environmental level about how you have to shift who and what you are. Because you have to start to form different common notions about where you are. And of course, all sorts of things follow. Things about wood and reusing wood, and when it's okay to burn it, and how much wood you burn, and the rest. And it shifts also the perspective. There is, and 2 days ago I was saying that actually environmentalism needs to involve government, because it is government that will save us. That is totally true. But government will only save us if we're totally well informed about what is happening. And there is a certain suspicion that isn't totally unjustified that most of the solutions that are suggested help very large business, which they do, and help some people, which they do, and therefore ought to be, to a degree, open to suspicion, which they should. But that suspicion oughtn't to be foolish, in the sense that it oughtn't just be suspicion because the government is imposing it. It ought to be based on knowledge. And actually, sometimes it's right. Sometimes heat pumps are the answer. They really are. They really do work. And if you've got the ability to generate your own electricity through solar, they're quite a successful solution. The problem comes is in those houses where they're not going to make that much difference, but they are going to use up a lot of power. So not all solutions work for all places. And that's why understanding where you are, what you are, and how your power generation works, how you fit into the world, not in general, not saying specific solutions, but particular, in the particular set of environments in which you live. So understanding how now you could call it your carbon footprint, but you see, I don't really like the phrase carbon footprint. Why? Because it monetarizes it all. The reason why that phrase exists is then you can monetize the value of carbon. And we can put it into a capitalist system where we're all understanding it in one dimension. And carbon dioxide is important, but it's all part of a wider picture of how you exist within a society, how you have an effect on it, a shadow, which is probably a better word, the shadow you cast. Understanding and owning that shadow, making it useful, making it dance, making it sing. All of it is possible. All of it is prefigured within the idea of money, which endlessly flows, goes somewhere else, understands how it can be recycled, reused. We understand what we have to do. It's just we have to ensure that we have the materials to do it. So you have to demand from, if you use AI, I don't, from AI how to do it. It might work. I find sometimes you have to use it because they've started to squimmy down the information you can get. So you have to now get it from AI, which really pains me. Yesterday I was looking up a fact about whether Chaucer mentioned fawns. He does in 1374, but not in his books. And finding out that it wasn't in a tale took me a frig of a long time. Where one time it would have been 3 clicks. I now have to go to AI to tell me, because it can rummage the sources that are now cut down. Anyway, so opening up sources so that you can actually understand your world is one of those things that really matters to all of this. We can get through this. Humans can easily survive environmental change. That's one of the really annoying things. We could survive. Oh, we're not going to. But we could. If only we have the courage and the sense to do it.